my friend and fellow troublemaker, John Hope Bryant, to join me on stage. Thank you all very much.
Isn't she fantastic?
Well, I feel the same way about him, so thank you.
So, and I was backstage going, yeah. So, the first thing I have to say is congratulations on the new forthcoming
thank you.
Expansion of your family.
Thank you very much.
And what a Christmas gift.
Yes,
that
thank
was.
you.
Christmas blessing.
We are very blessed.
And I will tell you, knowing you as I do, I'll say two things. One, the Federal Reserve President of Atlanta said earlier today, after he got an award, he says, does this make me a bad brother? Which is pretty cool for a Fed president to say. He may have asked that question, but I'm going to tell you, you're a bad sister.
Well, thank you, John.
Number two, my mother's in the audience right here, Juanita Smith. She's 81 years young, I think. She doesn't act like it. She's amazing. She told me she loved me every day of my life growing up. Anyway, and my wife's right next to her, Natasha. But I tell you, if I hadn't been raised by that woman who told me she loved me every day of my life, giving my self-esteem, knowing what I know about your household and what you do to sort of provide a well-rounded environment for your kids growing up, I'd want to be your kid. And so I wish for every family, every household, the sort of nurturing environment that you're providing for Charlotte and for your
thank you, John.
To-be.
And I hope you'll introduce me to your mom after.
Absolutely. Right there.
Yes, ma'am. Hi.
So you and me got lucky. We were both told we were loved. We both had families that poured self-esteem in us and confidence. We both know that real poverty has nothing to do with money. It has to do with self-esteem and confidence and how you believe in yourself. Role models, environment. You hang around 9 broke people, you'll be the 10th. Aspiration, code word for hope. The most dangerous person in the world is a person with no hope. I think what the Clinton Foundation, with your mom and dad, are trying to do is to create a global community of hope building with some tangible tools attached to it. Or as your father said in Africa, they need a distribution network. So I want to talk about young people with relation to all of these things. Because I think that, and Ambassador Andrew Young will be here in a little bit, told me to send his love to you. He said, you cannot have a movement without young people. My fear is that before the hope was delivered, the despair set in. And now you've got a group of young people around the world who are, for lack of a better word, acting out on their frustrations, on their lack of hope domestically here. There are legitimate frustrations. Black Lives Matter, what's going on in the penal system, our work around trying to frame reentry strategies. Women and girls, you're seeing many more girls, frankly, joining gangs and doing things that we would not have thought about 20 years ago because of the role modeling environment that they're experiencing. And other things. ISIS is recruiting young people who are frustrated, don't have a job, have no hope. 60% of the Middle East and the MENA region, Middle East and North Africa, will be under the age of 25 by 2020. 60%, and 60% of Saudi Arabia is under the age of 25 today. I also believe this is the decade of the woman.
Hopefully more than a decade, John.
Boom. Hello.
Sorry to interrupt the train of thought.
You've got a woman who is head of the most progressive economy in Europe, Merkel. In Germany, you've got a woman head of the IMF. You've got, first time in history, a woman Federal Reserve Chair, Yellen. There might be a female president. Coca-Cola, Lisa Borders just made $1 million commitment to us to put Hope Inside for women and Hope Business in a Box academies for girls, because we believe that women stay with abusive men primarily for money reasons.
We have a lot of evidence to back that up.
Yeah. So I just want to sort of frame this out. There's been so many talking heads talking about the problem. And I said last night on the stage with Ben Jealous and Van Jones and others, Van is here somewhere, the mayor, that the black male brand needs some retooling, because all you see is the negative when there's so much positive of black men raising their family and going to work and showing up and doing their thing. Part of that is systemic. Part of that's our own problem, our own responsibility to fix. So let's talk about what we can fix. There's been too much commentary on what we're against, what we're for. So take that in any direction you want to take it.
Yeah, well, thank you, John. I agree that we have an epidemic of hopelessness right now. But I also don't think that cynicism is the antidote to that. I tend to think that cynics are people who want to protect the status quo, right? And I don't want to protect the status quo. Right. So I would much rather be a pragmatic optimist, focused on what's worked and how we can further extend and expand that, and then quickly figure out kind of what else we need to do. And so kind of what does that mean in the context of what you just laid out? Well, I think the answer varies based on the challenge that we're trying to solve, which is one of the reasons why probably there are so many people talking about kind of the macro problem, because there are so many different dimensions to it. So for example, we now have as many people dying of substance abuse in our country as dying in car accidents. Yeah. Now that's partly because we're having fewer car accidents, thankfully, as more people are wearing their seatbelts, as airbags get better and more efficient. So car accident deaths have gone down, but also substance abuse deaths have gone up. And kind of to your point about how this is hitting women particularly hard, women have been the fastest rising part of that. So although the male kind of substance abuse deaths have kind of risen steadily, kind of women have gone up even more quickly. So we know that hopelessness is in some ways more kind of pandemic than it's ever been in our country. And we're seeing that not only in sort of the extreme cases of substance abuse deaths, but also, I would argue, in the parts of the country where diabetes rates are still rising, in parts of the country where people have stopped looking for jobs, in parts of the country where people kind of are dropping out at disproportionate rates from community colleges. And so we see kind of people disappearing themselves in really profound, tragic ways, in either kind of the mortality statistics or in the participation statistics. So we know that we need kind of different answers, right? And we need yet a coordinated response to hopefully marshal those different answers together. And I think a lot of what we need to do really does center on the family and the community. Yeah. And we've talked about this before, John. I mean, I think we need to completely revitalize our education system. I mean, I think it needs to start earlier, kind of as a segue from what I was speaking about with our commitment to too small to fail. I think pre-kindergarten is already too late. We know we need to be doing more to help ensure that we're supporting families to be able to do the work they feel called to do, particularly women who currently are not able to work if they're not able to afford childcare. And childcare costs in this country on average are between $9,000 and $11,000 per child. So,
and 70% of black households run by women.
So this is, so much of what we're talking about falls disproportionately hard on women and disproportionately hard on women of color. Right? So we know that we need to, I would argue, kind of make more public investments in our education system, because I think that's not only the right thing to do, that's the smart thing to do. Yes. Right? That is fundamentally about investing in our future and finding every kind of future Einstein and Sally Ride that we can find. We also know it's about our competitiveness. China has made a commitment to enroll every 4-year-old in pre-kindergarten by 2020, and they've said they might do the same for every 3-year-old by 2030.
Wow.
Now, they might be doing that because they think it's an egalitarian, equitable choice, or they might be doing that because they recognize it's about their continued global competitive growth. So I think, this is hopefully an area where we can have liberal and conservative coalescence,
Yes.
is investing in early childhood education, both to help ensure that every child can reach her or his God-given potential, but also to really support parents in being able to make the right choices for themselves and their families. And we know we need more community support around targeted challenges, like the rising substance abuse epidemic in our country, like the ongoing challenge with the lack of pathways to employment and opportunity. When people do get out of the juvenile justice or prison system, we absolutely need to restore voting rights to people who have paid their time.
Yes.
So we know we need to do a lot, and I do think this is an area where government has a role to play,
Yes.
an important role to play at the federal, state, and local level. But I also think it's an area, candidly, where private companies have a role to play. Right? In the same way that I shared what we're doing with our Chicapi distribution model across Latin America and the plans to extend that to West Africa and parts of India, we similarly have untapped and underrepresented markets in this country,
Yes.
right? Whether they're in inner cities or Appalachia.
Yeah.
So why can't there be a similar analog of a successful business enterprise that, whether it's focused similarly on female empowerment or just general enfranchisement? So I think there is opportunity for everyone here to do the right thing, but also to increase global inclusion through the vehicle of capitalism.
Yeah.
Whether that's government investments for our long-term growth and success, or targeted private sector investments to grow their bottom line.
So I want to underscore one thing you said in passing, but I want to make sure that people get the message here. I heard you say this was not a partisan issue. This is not a Republican or a Democrat issue.
We can't afford for this to be a Democrat or
Right.
Republican issue.
So it's not about the Republican Party, in my mind, or the Democratic Party. It's about the Get It Done Party. And we really need to be leaders who are going to get it done, and on this issue, not to politicize it. So we really need everybody under this tent, and not only to be bipartisan, but really non-partisan.
And we are seeing that in some ways. I mean, we've seen some Republicans be really interested in community investments around helping people recover from substance abuse.
Yeah.
Sadly, I think this is partly the result of the truly universal nature of our substance abuse epidemic in this country,
Yeah.
that it is equally gripping cities and rural communities, the north, the south, the east, the west, and also on early childhood. Because although I might be somewhat more motivated, in full disclosure, as a progressive by the individual equity argument, I am very much okay if someone else is equally motivated by the global competitive argument. And I think that we are seeing those strands come together as we're watching, particularly at the local and state levels, more Republicans be more interested in pre-kindergarten, even in 3-year programming, trying to figure out how to make childcare more affordable as an economic mobility mechanism more than anything else.
So let's go global and then come back local for a minute. In Saudi Arabia, I have an office there in Saudi, and there's a challenge with how they treat women. And they're working on it. They've made some progress. I think there's a lot more progress they need to make quickly. But what I found is that while women can't do this and women can't do that, and they don't see themselves in the government, they don't see themselves in the corporate hierarchy, you want to make God laugh, tell them your plan. Women have now emerged as the largest group starting small businesses and becoming entrepreneurs in Saudi, because that was an area that wasn't restricted.
Yep.
And by the way, that's probably going to be the most prominent area, because that's job creation, in 20 years in the Middle East, which means they're going to position themselves as power players. I want your take on that, about how entrepreneurship, small business creation, can be a window for women and girls to take their place on the world stage, make it the decade of the woman or the century of the woman. And what does that mean? Number two, getting edgy. I think the failure of the Freedmen's Bank in 1865 created a jobless Ferguson, Missouri, that lit on fire. Created a jobless Baltimore that lit on fire. Created a jobless South Central LA. That 700 credit score communities don't riot, 500 credit score communities riot, middle class neighborhoods don't riot, of any race. So the new color, I think, is green. It's not black, white, red, brown, and yellow, it's green. And helping people to greet, as Van Jones is here somewhere, said the best way to stop a bullet is a job. And what's your opinion on whether we can retool these communities and solve it through an economic prism? Question number one. Question number two, edgier, those in the penal system. And we've talked about prison reentry a lot. You're better authority on it than most people of color I know. I think there's a Steve Jobs locked in the penal system.
No doubt.
And I think I'll say this, you can't, I think a drug dealer is immoral, it's unethical, it's a special place in hell reserved for somebody who sells death to their own community. But if you're a successful drug dealer, one thing you're not is dumb. You understand import, export, finance, marketing, wholesale, retail, customer service, security, territory, and logistics. So maybe they can't get a job because they got a record, but they can create a job if we give them financial literacy in the penal system and help them graduate with dignity and become an entrepreneur. Those three big ideas. And then lastly, I guess, whatever you're passionate about.
All right, well, I'm going to try to keep all that in my head, but you have to remind me if I've forgotten something. So thinking about girls and women around the world, and I completely agree with your characterization of Saudi Arabia that they certainly have made progress. Women voted for the first time recently. A woman was elected for the first time recently. But women still can't drive and still aren't able to hold any job that kind of their aspirations might take them to. And so, certainly I think in places like Saudi and Yemen and elsewhere that restrict kind of women's freedom of movement, kind of freedom of expression, kind of whether that's through a capitalist vehicle or otherwise, that certainly needs to change, and we need to continue to apply positive pressure. And I hope that the success of the small women entrepreneurs in Saudi who will quickly, at least some of them, become not small, to your point, and will become significant contributors to the Saudi economy and employers, and then consequently influencers. Hopefully that will be kind of the unignorable argument for kind of fully liberating and unleashing the full potential of girls and women in that country, and hopefully that will have a ricocheted effect across the region. I would also say, though, because I think it's important that when, as an American, I talk about another country, that I also reflect on what more we need to do in this country around girls and women. The United States remains one of only 9 countries in the world to not have paid time off for mothers of new infants. And our company in that statistic are largely quite low income, small Pacific Island nation states. So not exactly the countries we normally are grouped together with. And so to me, finally getting to paid family leave isn't just the right thing to do for kind of the bonding that we know is so important in those early months between a mother, or really any parent, and a child. It's also, again, an economic argument, because we know that so many women don't go back to the workforce because they will have only been able to take a few days off under their employment agreement, and they understandably want more time in that precious kind of early moments of life with their child. So although those are different challenges, kind of the lack of freedom of movement and full participation versus the lack of paid time off, we know we really also have more work to do in this country. And clearly, additionally, around finally having equal pay for equal work and so much more. So I just think, John, it's important, while those of us who are blessed to have sort of a global perspective and to work and travel to other countries, I think absolutely raise our hands, stand up, and kind of highlight what we think is challenging, that we have enough sort of equal humility to recognize what still we need to work on in this country to ensure that every girl and every woman can make the choices that we think are right for ourselves and our families. So I think that's the answer to your first question. To the second question, the first part of it, I think you know so much more about this than I do. Given all the work that Operation Hope has done across the country, including in, I think, the 3 areas that you mentioned. So I think, on this, I'm very happy to be your follower, but I certainly believe so strongly that this is an area where kind of government has to create the space and opportunity, and then private enterprise, as well as NGO efforts, have to fill the gap. So kind of what does that mean? Well, as we've discussed repeatedly, I strongly believe we need to reform our sentencing laws, not only kind of prospectively, but retroactively.
Yes.
We clearly need to be doing more to ensure that people are able to not only get the skills and training that they desire while incarcerated, but can also start to create businesses, to create their own actual pathways to employment.
Yes.
So we need to be having a more holistic conversation than I think we're having right now about what pathways to opportunity really means. It can't start when the 600,000 people that are expected to get out of the juvenile system and the adult prison system this year walk out the door. It has to start the moment they actually walk in the door. So I think that is something where there is real work to be done. There are certainly kind of parts of the country that are pushing those boundaries, and those of us that have platforms like this need to do a better job of continuing to elevate those efforts, whether they're around community rehabilitation in the juvenile system in Missouri, or the efforts in some of the adult prisons to allow not only college-based individual programming, but as we see in New York, actually the ability to have the right to get a full college degree. But I think we need more than that, right? We need kind of the right of people to be able to start their businesses, grow their businesses while they're inside, so that they can continue to do that while they're outside. So I couldn't agree more that we need to continue to think about this area, work on this area, and I think, again, this is a place where ideally it's not bipartisan, it's nonpartisan,
Yeah.
and I think we're actually getting to that place. And I think we're getting to that place, again, for different reasons, right? For us, this may be kind of an equity argument, and for others it might be a cost argument.
Right.
But I candidly don't care if we're having kind of one coherent conversation about what we want our country to look like in terms of actual equal opportunity and how we get there. So I think we just have to keep kind of pushing us and hopefully expanding the us kind of in the right direction. And finally, I think circling back to something that you talked about earlier, kind of the question about young people. I get very frustrated when people tell me that young people are disengaged and disenfranchised and disinterested, because that's just not my experience. I just think that young people are engaging in ways that just look very different than what happened a generation or 2 generations before, in some regards, while also engaging in traditional ways as well. So what does that mean? Well, we see far more online activism by young people than we do offline activism, but that clearly has real purchase and meaning and resonance. That's the origin of Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
We also see young people volunteering at the highest rates of any generation ever. So last year, more than 50% of millennials volunteered for at least a day. Right? That I find incredibly inspiring. They're no longer volunteering only through their schools or their churches, the 2 kind of historic mechanisms by which people volunteered. They are still volunteering through their schools and their churches, but they're also directly connecting to the organizations that mean the most to them. Whether those organizations are Feeding America, the largest collection of food banks in the country, or volunteering as reading tutors in their local school. They're just expressing and organizing themselves kind of into volunteerism in a much more kind of self-driven and motivated way.
Is that why you wrote the book?
That's partly why I wrote the book.
Yeah.
And I partly wrote the book too because I kept meeting young people, and particularly kids, who were really curious about the world around them and wanted to understand what was happening and what they could do. But I will say, and I see we're running out of time, and I just feel so compelled to make this point because I think it is an important one. So while young people are engaging in really profound and I would argue positively disruptive ways, it is also crucially important that young people engage in traditional ways as well. So for example, when my parents left college and law school, they say, anecdotally, they think maybe half their friends considered running for public office. Thought that whether they were originally going into the military or to be lawyers or to be doctors or to be teachers or to be scientists, pretty much across kind of an ecosystem of professions, they at least considered running for public office, and they certainly would have considered serving an elected official they felt connected to, whether their local mayor, like Mayor Reed, or their governor, or their president.
Yeah.
I don't know about I'm 35, so I don't know about kind of my cohort here, or even people that are younger than me, but I can think of maybe one, maybe two of my friends that are interested in running for public office. And my friends have, in many ways, the same biographies that my parents' friends had. They've had successful military careers, they're scientists, they're doctors, they're lawyers, they're activists, they work in NGOs, they work in foundations, they work in the corporate social responsibility programs of big companies, right? They are the people that I would argue I would want to formally engage in the political process. So John, you were nice enough to mention my book, and as was Lisa, as I've been out talking to students across the country about
it's a bestseller,
my book, It's Your World. Yeah. Thank you, John. You can plug it as much as you want. In every school that I've been in, including here in Atlanta, when I was here a few months ago, to San Francisco, to New York, to Little Rock, when I got to go back to my Horseman Junior High School, although it's now called a middle school.
Inner city Atlanta.
Inner city Atlanta, Dr. King, middle school. Every school, some kid raised their hand, this happened literally in every school, and asked me if I had any plans to run for public office. And I understand why I'm asked that question. My last name's Clinton, they know my dad was president, they know my mom's running for president. And I always say, oh, well, thank you. But I always say, and I feel so strongly about this, that I'm over the time limit still talking to you because I feel so strongly about this. And normally I try really hard to follow
They're
the
not
rules.
Complaining. Are you enjoying this?
Is that I always say, you should be asking yourself that same question. Right? You shouldn't just be asking me that question. Right? If you care enough about the answer to that question, you should be asking yourself that question. And you should be asking yourself that question at 12. You should be asking yourself that question at 18 and throughout your life. Because so much of what we've talked about here on this stage, whether it's paid maternity leave, or it's reforming our criminal justice system, depends on who is in office at the local, state, and federal level. Yeah. And so one of the things I'm so grateful to John for is that for all of his kind of tireless civic activism, he really recognizes that, as you can tell by the people that he's invited to the stage today. Because as much as those of us who might advocate or even agitate can get done outside the political process, who's elected really matters. Yeah. And so I hope that young people, particularly the more than half of millennials who are already volunteering, who are already engaged in trying to make a difference in their communities and across our country, will think about trying to be the next mayor or trying to be the next president. So please, for the young people in the audience, if you take nothing else away from that, I hope that that will resonate with you. And I just am so grateful to John for all of his work, and I'm always on his team. And John, I want to meet your mother, and she's not there, so I hope that means she's backstage.
That's right. That's right.
Fantastic.
So as we close, is there a big idea, Chelsea, that you want to leave? And maybe you've already said it, but is there a big idea that you're passionate about, other than pitch hitting for your mom, that you want everybody to know today?
Well, I think what I just talked about is a big idea, but I also think, circling back to as much as I teased you when you said maybe this is the decade of the woman, and I said, hopefully a lot longer than that. You talked about kind of the women in Saudi Arabia who are starting small businesses. In 2014, African American women on a percentage basis started more small businesses in the United States than any other demographic. So if we kind of fully unleash the potential of girls and women in this country, I think we have no idea kind of what our future will look like. And so maybe, to your point, you said, there might be a young man sitting in prison somewhere who's the next Steve Jobs. I would argue there are probably lots of girls, whether they're sitting in juvenile detention or they're sitting in this room today or they're in their classroom because it is a school day, who also could be the next Steve Jobs. And I just think it's so important that all of us remember that and work toward that end. Thank you very much.
You love her, give her some love.
Thank you.
I got a special surprise for you.
Okay. Thank you, John.
So I love surprising my friends.
Oh, dear.
Oh, dear. If you haven't guessed, not only are we good friends, I think she's genuinely one of my sheroes. And I think you've heard for yourself what is really her best quality: authenticity. There's no games here. There's no player hating here. She's not coming out here talking about what she's against. She's talking about what she's for. She's trying to drive the agenda forward. She could be chilling. She could be doing whatever it is she wants to do. Her name's Clinton. She could be doing nothing. And everybody would say that's fantastic. But she decides to do the work. She is working from can't see in the morning to can't see at night. Pregnant, showing up to work. And her work as vice chair of the Clinton Foundation, I'll say the only organization that I think is clearly doing more than Operation Hope is the Clinton Foundation. I mean, hundreds of billions of dollars have been unleashed in poor African countries, in Asia, in Latin America, in North America, in South America, in India, in the Middle East, because of the work of the Clinton Foundation. I saw you, we were in Africa together, working on advancing that agenda. So I think that I want to kudos to the Clinton Foundation. No good deed shall go unpunished sometimes, but I commend you for what you're doing, number one. Number two, if you want to know something about President Bill Clinton and Secretary Hillary Clinton, look at the daughter they created. So it is my great honor to give you the Civil Rights Award for Operation Hope at the Hope Global Forum in 2016. You might know a man who got it before you. His name was President Bill Clinton.
Thank you, John. Oh, wow. Wow. Oh, yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.